Okay, Dr. Ing Dr. SC Nat Victor Levay, Doctor of Engineering, Doctor of Physics, 1915. He's done his doctorate under Alexander Brill, as did Max Planck and another character, Johannes Stein. Now, in 1915, Levay is going for his second doctorate. It's a really proud achievement to have gained a doctorate in physics and now to go for this second in engineering. And it's the only document that he ever presents which uses his physics title, which means he's standing on the physics in order to gain his doctorate of engineering. It's the best document he's ever going to produce because it's as close to the truth as he dares to go in order to gain his doctorate and to gain the position he needs to be a man of influence. And so in that context, the document of dissertation that he writes must be seen in that provenance as the smartest man existing in that day, because he had all the other guys in his team. It's Heisenberg, it's Stein, it's Alexander Brill linking them together, it's Max Planck, all involved in understanding elastic membrane theory and how it affects the psyche. And so Levay dares himself to show just enough and then to show how in practice engineers can use this information. And my God, it is incredible information in terms of engineering, because you can build reinforced concrete structures from it, incredible membranes that shouldn't stand there, but they do. And it's a way of stealing the energy, corrupting nature in order to make the reinforced steel to make these things stand up. And in that corruption, it corrupts the atmosphere, and that those who are in control know all about how to control it, and that's how the manipulation works. So I'm saying it's an important document because it opens the door to relativity, where in Einstein's paper in 1904 for special relativity, but with the thought experiment about the clocks and how do you really solve that in the event horizon, they came up with general relativity. But know this, general relativity is merely application of matrix calculus to an explanation of the clocks. And it works, but it's wrong, because the speed of light is infinite in one direction, and therefore the reflected speed of light is c/2. And so you can prove that in 1904 if you remove the quantizing added in 1915, the same date as this paper from Dr. Levay. He opened the door, and with Einstein, they closed it. So there's my introduction. And so I'm just going to talk you through what actually Levay is saying in this document. So I want you to imagine two infinite circles. And that what they represent is heat. And you've got two bodies, and they are different temperatures. The size of the body is defined by the scale of the temperature. How big in dimension can that temperature be, and to all be the same temperature? And the answer is both infinite and zero, because the only way that it can do that is to make sure that there's motion within the bodies themselves in order to maintain a heat. And that heat will have an upper bound and a lower bound. You could look at that heat and you can split it into twelfths again if you wanted to, and see the motion again. And you could split each twelfth into twelfths and see the motion again. You're going to repeat the motion. And so what that does is it creates this shape. And I want you to imagine that the two infinite circles are at their 0 dot points. They're just two dots at either end of that structure. And you can see it's imbalanced, that it's to one side. And so this is the stretching that creates the boundary between space and time between the two particles. That it's motion. The motion is too excessive between this, from heat within equal heat, it's too excessive and it's going to split off, and it creates this as its dying break between those two particles of heat. I'm going to tell my dog to be quiet. Shut up, Sid. All right, enough. Okay, so you're seeing a particle splitting into two, leaving behind this trail, and this is a section of it. And you can see it's imbalanced, and what that's representing is the tension in the surface between the two above and below. The different heats are now above and below. They're almost touching each other with this shape in between them, and this shape is in motion. Okay. And so by analysing the shape, he's come up with these two diagrams indicating the tension and the bending, the relationship between the two in this motion of particles between the particle as it splits. And one is going clockwise and one's going anti-clockwise. And that's what he's showing there. You can see there's an imbalance. But that imbalance is not equal. There's a difference between them. And so he's now going to set off on a journey to explain the maths behind that. And then he comes to this one. Now, and this is at the end, this is his conclusion. So, bearing in mind what I've told you about Dr. Leve and what he's going to tell us in this document, this is where he concludes. He's showing us the sections of loadings that change within the wave formation of that circulating shape. So again, this is the sections split into 5 of that shape that we saw of the spinning droplet. And so all I've done is to show those, split those out into the 5 sections as he's shown them, and show the plan view of the wave formation that's created. Bearing in mind, we're seeing a particle splitting here. This is sub-particle behavior. So left and right represent the particle splitting, and this is the wave formation in between. So you have a wave with a dimple going, centers going down, and we're saying stability. And I'm saying this is theoretical time. I've frozen it in time, so we've got a theoretical starting point. So let's take that as stability. What happens is, we've seen from the analysis that we've got this shape, and it's offset, so that the center of gravity of this droplet, and we're looking at the droplet of that shape, looking at the very tip of that droplet, we now see this shape appear, an imbalance. And it moves that in that direction. And Leve has proved that through his maths and his matrix calculus, trust me. And so we come to what should then happen from that perspective that we've just shown. We've now gone from here, imbalance, creating a torque clockwise. Balance is restored with the wave as it should be, but that clockwise torque is still maintained. And therefore, when it switches again, the wave formation ripples the other way. It goes from center in to center out. That torque is now has an equal and opposite reaction, has an anti-clockwise torque. And then that creates the final vibration of circular motion that Leve is describing. So here's, I've coloured it in a bit so it's harder to see, but you can see section in condition 5, which is stability in reality, where time is in motion. Because you're seeing heat try to be moved from hot to cold. And that it can't, once by the motion of moving from hot to cold, its temperature changes, and therefore it wants to be back joined up again. It's a hysteresis effect of bouncing between two conditions. And it maintains this bounce, not as a bounce, but as a rotary motion. So this is going inside anti-clockwise, outside goes clockwise. There's anti-clockwise, clockwise going through the systems. The ultimate whole system is turning clockwise. This is turning anti-clockwise. And you can see at the top how a yin-yang shape is constructed. because you've got these three different motions now suddenly going on in this split of time, remembering that it's the same time. The time here is the same as the time there. In terms of the particle, it hasn't yet split, so time exists right across it, and this is what's happening in between that subparticle world. There's a little mechanism that creates friction, and the friction creates heat, and that heat is added to the heat, and that's what creates the balance. So really, really delicately balanced mechanism at the 0 dot point energy right there. So if you really understand the information I've just given you and you apply it to relativity E equals mc squared, and you look at the double slit experiment, and you'll realize what I've always known to be true, that science already knows the answer to the double slit experiment. It chooses not to tell us, and it chooses to lie to us instead. And that Einstein's 1915 paper is a committee stitch-up. When the Norwegians discovered the double slit experiment, it showed the Germans' hand. The Germans panicked, had to come up with another lie, and they came up with the Copenhagen interpretation to close the door. But the instruction that Heisenberg and Max Born gave, that quantum is a closed theory and will not warrant further modification, is not an instruction I need to listen to, and I don't. And in so doing, I found that Dr. Levy has already told me what I knew to be true, and now you know it too. And you know the danger of reinforced concrete. Okay, so it's a big day if you choose to believe that any of this might be true, and I invite you to look up Dr. Victor Levy, and there are at least two that I've found of varying titles, and I want you to do some homework and see this might be true, because all of what I've said is providence facts that science already knows. Of course, the end of this thesis from Levy should have ended as I described it, with a description of how reality works, and our place in it, and the place for God, and the place for moral behaviour. But they chose not to. So now it's going to be the hard way. But make it easy for yourselves and help those around. And remember, forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. This is the morning of the dawning of the day of truth, when you choose it to be. Love rules. Do the work. Choose.